Hello and welcome to a brand new edition of the NBA Chats. I am your host, as always, Alan Ramich. Coming back this week, like Eric Pincus last week, a returning guest to the podcast, but under the brand new format. It's his first time. He is Bleacher reporter. He also, I don't have the copy of the book, I loaned it to my friend, but if I did, I'd be showing it off. Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. Mr. Jake Fischer, as you can see for the video podcast guys, he's back on the show. How are you doing today, my friend?
Thank you for having me. You got to have the friend buy the copy, man. You can't just loan that stuff out. What are we doing here?
Well, I understand that, but he wanted to read it, and it takes like a month to get. So I was like, you know what? Have a sneak peek. Have a sneak peek.
No, the fact that the book is making its way through England is very cool to me. So thank you for that, man. I appreciate it.
It's a great book. Like I said, I don't like plugging things that I don't like, so I genuinely really enjoyed it. So thank you for that. And it does provide a different context into the whole tanking, and there's some great stories in there. You know, like you said when you came on last time, there's stories in there for everyone. So I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, man. Have your friend leave a nice Amazon review. That'll be nice. That'll be good compensation for me.
Well, whoever's listening to this, leave him a review, even if you haven't read it.
Good reviews. That'd be great. Yeah.
As always, this great podcast is powered by the wonderful 19 Media Group. And let's just dive in, Jake. I know you're a busy man. The biggest domino for me was always the whole Ben Simmons thing and what was going to happen with Ben. And then, obviously, the past few weeks, we've had Daryl Morey come out, it seems like multiple times, and talk about the situation. And then you're reporting with the whole James Harden thing where he's looking like he's maybe thinking about leaving Brooklyn, or is certainly entertaining the option of entering unrestricted free agency. What's that situation like at this very moment? Because it seems like a situation that is very fluid, but also at a standstill, if that makes sense.
Yes. It's definitely fluid, and everything could change between now and a week from now. We're recording this on Thursday, right at 3:00. So literally a week from now will be the deadline, 3:00 Eastern time. And we're in this quiet period where, kind of similar to the draft, I always feel like I like to get a good handle on all the intel that's out there, because then the week or so before the draft, people start to send out smoke screens and there's conflicting intel and it's confusing. This week, typically, the week before the deadline is when the phones start to go a little quiet. And teams are holding their cards closer to their vest, and they're kind of waiting. Like the parameters of the trade market have kind of already been set. There's the buyers and the sellers, and there's the people who could go either way, like Portland and Sacramento, and New Orleans and Indiana. New Orleans is a full buyer, but in terms of, teams that have different types of pathways. And we'll see what actually does come to fruition, and which teams lower their asking prices and which teams lower their offering prices. But all that being said, at this point in time, the Sixers have made it very clear that they are aligned from ownership to the front office to Joel Embiid to Doc Rivers, that they're only going to make a Ben Simmons trade when that big difference maker type of piece comes up. And I just don't think that piece has presented themselves to Philly at this point in time. You mentioned the Harden stuff. There's certainly a lot of speculation around the league amongst very credible people that James has his sights set on joining Philadelphia this summer if it doesn't work out in Brooklyn this year. And I'm sure there are other teams that are preparing for the possibility for a free agent James Harden to make a run at him as well. But that Harden thing is not guaranteed. There's also the Bradley Beal dynamic in Washington, where he could one day decide, I no longer want to be here, and that's an opportunity for Philly as well. But just like those two names we mentioned, both James and Brad are far greater players than what's been brought to Philly's negotiating table at this point in time, and I think that context is absolutely hanging over their trade conversations right now.
Yeah, and I was going to bring up Brad Beal because obviously he's dealing with this sprained left wrist at the moment, but at the same time, there's a report came out. I think I can't remember. I think it was Mark Stein, where he said that he's not completely rejecting the idea of a trade, which, like you said, a week to the trade deadline, that makes things really interesting, in my opinion, for Ben Simmons, because like you said, that's a name that Philadelphia has been linked to for a while in the Simmons talks, but at the same time, the Wizards would be getting a franchise cornerstone back as well if that trade were to happen.
Yeah. If I'm Tommy Shepard, if I'm the Washington Wizards, I am calling Daryl Morey and saying, I'll give you Brad, give me Ben and Tyrese Maxey and a first, and let's get this thing done. That's what I would. I haven't heard that conversation's actually happened. From everything I've heard, Washington seems dead set on trying to bolster the roster around Bradley Beal. I wrote about Domantas Sabonis yesterday. They've been linked to Jerami Grant. I do think they are trying to find another piece to add to Brad versus trying to unload him. Ted Leonsis, their owner, has repeated time and again that they have no interest in moving Brad, and until he gives them a trade request, just like Russell Westbrook did this summer, until that moment arrives, I do not expect them to move Bradley Beal. Could it happen before the 10th? It's possible. I mean, he's not playing right now, and the team obviously not going to be continuing to move up in the standings without Bradley Beal. I mean, they could, but it doesn't seem as likely. They're out of the playing picture entirely. The recipe doesn't seem great for Washington right now, but I do expect Bradley Beal to stick around. I do expect, so far he's given pretty clear indications that he wants to stick around to sign his extra fifth year and his extra $60 million, and then we'll go from there. If I'm Washington, right, like, why am I helping Bradley Beal get an extra $60 million just for him to maybe likely request a trade this time next year? So I understand why that would happen now, but I still think it's not very realistic of a scenario to unfold here.
Okay. And I agree with you, by the way. If I was the Wizards, I'd absolutely be ringing Philadelphia myself to try and get Ben Simmons, because the team control, I think the discourse on Ben Simmons has gone quite far the other way. It swings way too far on both sides. He's either the best player in the world or and I understand the whole sitting out aspect, but yeah, it's a very interesting situation. A name that you did bring up that I found fascinating, and obviously you mentioned it in your article, and there will be a link to it in the post below the podcast, about Domantas Sabonis. Is he a candidate to get traded before the deadline? Because it's an interesting one, because I was always assuming that he'd be a piece that the Pacers would want to keep because he's on a team-friendly deal as well.
He is on a very team-friendly deal. Miles Turner seemed to be the most likely big man to get dealt for a while, and then he was injured. That stress reaction in his foot, and now that dynamic's had another spin of the wheel, if you will. That it seems like Turner's latest foot scan could have him back sometime after the All-Star break, early March, the latest. And in that scenario, that could make him attractive again to a competitor, to a playoff team that's looking to be competitive. Unfortunately, the reality is that the Pacers are asking for a lot on both of those guys. So Sabonis' name is definitely out there. I mean, Sacramento's poked around on him too. New Orleans definitely has interest. New Orleans has interest in a ton of guys. They're all over the board in terms of their opportunities and avenues that they're exploring. But I do still think Turner would seem to be, and my answer has changed. Like Tuesday, I thought Sabonis was more likely to be moved of the two big men, but at this current moment, and we're always trying to bring this most up-to-date info as we can. I think Turner probably would be the most likely big man to get moved, being that Indiana has signaled so far that they only would like to move one of those guys. It's just the intel from the get-go was that Rick Carlisle's coaching staff did not enjoy trying to scheme around two of those big men. So I still would expect them to move one of those guys for sure.
On Turner, is there any teams that, because obviously you mentioned New Orleans are a big player in things at the moment, but they seem, I don't know, Valanciunas has been really good for him this year. I don't see them being like a natural fit for Miles Turner. So is there like any other teams that right now, I feel like Dallas is another team that could be quite a natural fit for Miles Turner as
For
well.
sure. And I don't think the Pelicans are really circling Miles Turner too much. I think they've looked at Sabonis more than Turner. They looked at Turner in the past. I reported this at some point along the way. They offered the number 4 pick that ended up being dealt to Atlanta in the 2019 draft that became DeAndre Hunter. The Pelicans offered that number 4 pick first to Indiana and wanted it straight up for Miles, and the Pacers said no. So they have tracked him in the past. It seems like Sabonis has been the name that's come up more for the Pelicans this time around. For Miles, it's been Portland. Sacramento's looked into both of the Pacers bigs. Dallas, like you mentioned, New York's come up. Charlotte's come up. Toronto, I wrote this week that there was a Goran Dragic and a first-round pick type of offer that was discussed for Toronto. I think Toronto's looking for a lot more than that, though. They're looking for Nikola Vucevic and then some type of offer for Sabonis. They're looking for something even, Aaron Gordon or more that the Magic got last year. So that's kind of the big thing with the Pacers is that they have communicated from December that they're willing to make a lot of moves. All these guys are on the block. They're open for business, but they've also continued to project a very high asking price that has been, every team I've talked to that's talked to Indiana, from Caris LeVert to Sabonis to Miles Turner, they've all listed those guys as having an unrealistic asking price from the Pacers side of things. So I wonder what the Pacers are actually willing to do coming up here, but by all indications, it would seem like they are motivated to at least move one of those big men with Rick Carlisle in the fold and him being on a 4-year deal, making $7 million plus a year. He clearly has a lot of influence in that franchise, and the coaching staff, like I said, from the get-go has not really been enchanted by playing both those bigs. So that seems to still be a likely outcome, but it's going to take, if the Pacers are here and other teams are here, it's going to take them coming to the middle and bridging that gap and what the offers are and what the price is.
Yeah, and that seems to be like a common theme throughout, like tracking this whole trade situation, where it seems very much like a seller's market at the moment, but also the buyers don't want to give up anywhere near the amount that the sellers want at the same time. It is a cat and mouse game at the moment, like you mentioned. On Caris LeVert, though, before we move on, what is the general gist of his asking price? Because I didn't think, he's a good player, is definitely a starter in the NBA, but I didn't really seem to assume that his asking price would be so high. But It seems like you've reported, other people have reported it, that it is very high, and I just wanted to get like a gist of what the actual price is for him.
Yeah, they've wanted at least a first-round pick, and I think the Cavs, for example, have been one of the teams most often linked to him, and they have this Ricky Rubio first-round pick package that's out there. They have not really expressed much interest in using that to go get Caris, just being that the injury concerns are very, very real. And Caris's talent is what it is. He was obviously a centerpiece of a deal that went out and got James Harden for Brooklyn, and he has had playoff moments, former first-round pick, clear, two-way potential, but the ability question, the health questions, those medical red flags are definitely what's standing in the way of teams paying what the Pacers want to get for him.
Okay. That makes sense, actually, because obviously, thankfully he did pass all the cancer scare and everything like that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Pacers, because I don't know, I didn't expect their season to go this way at the start of the year. So it is an intriguing one, and one that I hope will heat up, because I think that could be the one that has the most explosive type of trade deadline. Another guy that's been mentioned basically since the start of the year, and it seems like he's coming back into health, is Jerami Grant. What's the current situation? Yeah. So, what's the situation on Jerami? Because it's very, very, it's a fascinating one for me, because I like Jerami Grant, but it seems like the Detroit Pistons like him a hell of a lot more than a lot of people do.
He's got a wide market. A lot of teams have called, from the Lakers to the Jazz to Portland to Sacramento. Indiana's come up there as well. Atlanta's had conversations there. Minnesota, down the list. I'm sure I'm missing some. I think there's still a strong possibility that Jerami Grant sticks around in Detroit. And I think there are some people in that front office who want to keep him and some people who want to trade him. That's where it was last year too, when he had that great, first season with the Pistons and clearly was showing all-star type of potential. Now that he's up for a very expensive extension this summer, it's brought this conversation back to light, and any team that will acquire him or that does acquire him, they would have to be on board. They would have to acquire him with the willingness to pay him a 4-year, over $100 million extension. This is not a situation in the way the league's at right now. You can't just trade for these guys and evaluate it and come at it next time. Like, you can't sacrifice precious draft capital not knowing and not believing that this is a guy you want to pay that money to. So that's one element to this. And because of how limited the market is and how few impact players like Jerami Grant are out there, I mean, even the Miles Turners and the Domantas Sabonis of the world and John Collins, like, Jerami Grant's probably the most malleable, versatile piece that could fit in a variety of different situations. Chicago, for example, Memphis. I don't think the Grizzlies are actually contemplating ways to get Jerami Grant, while I still think Chicago is trying to find a way to get him without Patrick Williams. But that's kind of where things stand with him, being that his numbers also, far lower than a Ben Simmons or a CJ McCollum or Russell Westbrook. He's only making roughly $20 million. That's a very tangible, easy deal to acquire. So I think that's kind of all the details surrounding Jerami at this point. It's just going to take a team to offer a lot of and multiple first-round picks and a young player type deal, something along those lines. I think Patrick Williams and a first and stuff from Chicago would probably get it done for them. But again, that's like commensurate with draft capital value. And if a team doesn't meet that high price, I definitely would still think there's a strong chance that the Pistons hold on to him.
Yeah, Jerami, he is one of those players, like you said, that he can fit in multiple schemes, in multiple situations. We've seen him in Denver where he's flourished as being this, uber high level 3-and-D role player. It's definitely an interesting one. I want to ask you, just moving on, like I mentioned earlier, it's a very, very much a seller's market. Where are Portland in this? Because you mentioned Portland multiple times as being like somewhere in between. But they also have like guys who are expiring in the summer, like Nurkic and Covington, McCollum and Lillard. Obviously, Lillard's out for an extended period of time. Where are they in this whole craziness pertaining to the deadline?
Yes. So the Blazers, I think, a week out, teams are still wondering how far and which directions they are going to be willing to go. It's starting to sound very likely that Joe Cronin does stick around and holds the top job in Portland. So the original fears or doubts or skepticism, whatever word you wanted to call, about whether or not that this front office would have the authority to make a big deal like moving CJ McCollum, those questions have seemed to dwindle. Anyone who I have spoken to that's got some type of knowledge of that situation there, Joe Cronin hired an assistant GM from Cleveland mid-season, Andre Patterson, who's been kind of promised, from what I've been told, ability to have influence in the draft and free agency and to hire other people below him. You can't really make those decisions if you don't have the authority to make other decisions, right? So It seems like they are ripe to make a CJ McCollum deal finally, especially with the Anthony Simons explosion ahead of his expensive payday. It's probably coming this summer as well. So they're definitely probably going to make one move at least to get under the tax, and that move seems to most likely be moving Robert Covington to a variety of different landing spots. If they can get a first-round pick back, I think that would be a goal for them for sure. But if they could get a couple of seconds or a young player that makes less money, I think that'd be intriguing to them as well. And there are teams out there. I mean, New Orleans is one that comes up the loudest in terms of looking at CJ McCollum. So I can totally see that still coming to fruition if the Blazers do get enough of a package back that they deem valuable. But I think it's also they played pretty well of late. If they continue to get healthier, there's still a possibility of Dame coming back this year. They're the 10 seed in the play-in tournament right now. Like, New Orleans and Sacramento have still just not been able to get there. And the Clippers are hanging tough, so they don't seem to be going anywhere either. So the 10 seed seems to be where the Blazers are at, for better or worse. Like, I don't think they're going to try to tank out of that dynamic, but we'll see exactly how far willing they are to go in terms of being a seller. And I think they could even still make a move like acquiring a Miles Turner right now, someone who has a couple of years left on his deal, who they think could be a better piece to acquire and have him in kind of stash for when Dame's fully healthy next season. I think that's still on the table as well. But I think they're still kind of figuring out, Portland internally, which directions that they entirely do want to go.
Yeah, and it makes sense, like you said. It's basically because there's been so much craziness in the NBA with COVID and whatnot. You could completely forget that Neil Olshey left in the middle of the season, so it is an intriguing situation there. I want to obviously, I'm a Laker fan. I want to talk about the Lakers a little bit, just because I personally am not expecting a lot to happen with LA. What's your gist of things right now? Because it just does seem like if anything, they'll just try and make moves around the edges at this moment.
Sorry, I was reading a text. Can you repeat which team?
Right. The Lakers.
The Lakers, yes. And that's your team, right?
Yes, very much so.
Listen, the Lakers are obviously not in a great spot right now. And they're looking. I mean, they're trying to, from DeAndre Jordan to Dwight Howard to the Kent Bazemores of the world, to trying to see what this Talen Horton-Tucker, Kendrick Nunn first-round pick package can get. I mean, they definitely offered that for Jerami Grant, but like we just discussed, I mean, that's probably not going to be enough to get him, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know specific other frameworks that have been thrown out there, but I think the way it's been described to me is they've just been calling teams and saying, hey, Talen Horton-Tucker first and Kendrick Nunn, like, what can that get us? Mm-hmm. I think that's really where they're at right now. I don't think they're going to use that to move Russ. I mean, that seemed unlikely all along. I think they're looking at that pick as a way to upgrade, not as a way to get off Russ's salary. And it's the Lakers, right? Like 2023 isn't that far away in terms of free agency world, where Russ's money's going to come off their books and they'll have a lot of cap room, and they'll be talking about which big stars are going to sign anyway. But for now, I mean, the pressure is on to try to optimize LeBron. I mean, this knee injury, right? That's what he's dealing with.
Yes, yeah. Left knee.
It's definitely going to be, I mean, I've heard it's minor, but it's going to be something that kind of nags and has to be managed throughout the year. Like, LeBron was looking mortal or immortal a couple weeks before that happened, right?
Oh,
like,
it was incredible. It was legitimately incredible watching him. In spite of everything else on the team, it was a joy watching LeBron.
Exactly. So when he's still showing that ability at this stage of, I mean, they are championship or nothing, right? Mm-hmm. So that's going to continue to govern all their decision making. They're going to continue to try to add to this core, add to this group, and try to fortify a legitimate playoff rotation around him. I just don't see a lot of flexibility that they have to move. I mean, all their guys were on minimum deals. If you move Kent Bazemore, like, how much more are you getting back? If you move DeAndre Jordan, what are you really getting back? Like, could they move DeAndre or Dwight to Charlotte, who needs another big man, or Toronto, who's looking for a big man, or Milwaukee, who's looking for a big man? Like, sure, but like, what are they really getting back from those teams on another minimum salary that's going to dramatically move the needle for the Lakers? I don't really know. So they're active, they're looking, but in terms of like all the teams that are trying to buy that have clear avenues to get better, the Jazz, even like Phoenix with the Dario Saric expiring contract and Jalen Smith, like, they've got more to work with. The Lakers are just so limited in what they have to do.
Yeah, and that seems to be like where I am at this point as well. I think they will make a move. It just I don't think it'll be anything major. I just think it'll be around the edges. One team that I do want to talk about before we just quickly round up is, and you mentioned them as buyers or sellers at this point, is the Kings, because they have a lot of intriguing pieces. We've seen rumors about them being involved in Ben Simmons discussions, and Daryl Morey coming out and refuting those trade discussions on Philly radio. Where are the Kings? Because they have a lot of intriguing pieces like a Harrison Barnes, Buddy Hield, that they seem to want to get off. But what's the market there?
Yeah, the Kings are all over the place. I mean, just like Portland, where they've had this white whale of Ben. They definitely are in the mix for John Collins and Jerami Grant and Miles Turner and Sabonis. Like, they're looking at all their options to buy, but they've also got Harrison Barnes to sell, and maybe that's a way to get more capital back to then use that to go and buy somebody else. So that's kind of the type of stuff that Sacramento's looking to do. They've got the Tristan Thompsons of the world who are for sale, Buddy Hield for sale. Rashawn Holmes hasn't exactly been a factor for the Kings this year after his free agency this summer. Like, I think he's very available. So, I mean, the Kings they're about to miss the playoffs for what, the 16th straight year, I think it is. Like, they've got to do something. Vivek Ranadive wants to make the playoffs. He's wanted to make the playoffs since he bought the team in May 2013, which there's a lot of Kings details in my book about how
it is
wayward Vivek's leadership has been and the things he's done to kind of pull strings behind the scenes to make the team more shaped at his vision and then gone back on that vision. Like, the Kings are going to do something here. And they have a lot of different options on the board. But I think they're the Sacramento, Portland, New Orleans, Pacers, Hawks, group. That's the group that I think is going to see the most fireworks potentially.
Okay. It's I know. Obviously, you're strapped for time, so I'll just ask you one more question just before we sign off. Who do you see being the biggest name to get moved? Because I don't know. I think Jerami Grant or Miles Turner. That's the gist that I'm getting right now. It's probably going to be one of those two, right? Like before the trade deadline.
That's what I would think. So yeah, Sabonis is still on the table. John Collins is still on the table. I mean, De'Aaron Fox, I would not rule him out being moved as well. That seems less likely though, like far less likely. It seems like Turner and Jerami Grant. Again, this is my answer was different on Tuesday, but at this point in time, yeah, I do think that Miles Turner and Jerami Grant are probably the two most likely big names to get dealt.
Okay. Jake, I want to thank you so much for coming on. And like I said, I know it's a very, very busy time of year for you. Where can the people find you and all your great work?
Thank you, man. Like I said, always a pleasure jumping on with the old folks back in the old country. But I lived in London for a bit in college, so it's a pleasure to come on here, man. Bleacher Report is where most of my work is at, doing a bunch of shows and stuff and talking a lot. So you'll see me. All that stuff's on my Twitter and my book, like you mentioned, Built to Lose: How the NBA is Tanking Era Change the League Forever. If you are overseas, the easiest way to purchase it is through my publisher, Triumph Books. And if you want, shoot me an email. It's in my Twitter bio or DM me, and we can do a signed copy, overseas shipping. Why not? So, thanks again for having me on, Alan. It was a pleasure as always.
And I hope it's not as long as it was last time to this time to have you on again, because I really enjoy having you on, my friend.
Sounds good, man. Take care, all right?
Thank you, guys. Thanks for listening. Be sure to leave a rating and review. Take care. Peace. Bye.